The Hog's Tie is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogstie.com.
It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and John Worrell. And now, here's your host, Chris Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstie Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports industrial entertainment complex. I am joined by my two fellow amateur gabbers, John and Steve. How you doing today?
See, technically we're not amateurs because technically...
Amateur gabbers.
Yeah.
You guys, I was going to compliment you, Chris. I thought, I was thinking to myself, man, Chris is nailing this intro. This intro is going to be the best of all time intros. And then amateur gabbers, John and Steve.
See, technically speaking, this is a business. It may be a business that loses money, but that technically speaking, I think we're probably professionals at this. As even despite the utter lack of talent. As long as we're talking about this, let me get a couple plugs in here because lots of good stuff's been happening at the Hogstie. Number one, if you haven't checked out Rick Snyder's show, Seasons of Discontent, we're up to I think episode 9, I believe now. It's going to be off the air this week, but it'll be back next week. But it's a great look at all things DC sports through the mind of a cynic, which is always fun. A great show, so check that out. And then Jamal from the Hogstie has started a new film series on YouTube where he's taking a look at some film video of the players that were drafted, so check that out because that's new and fun, and he put a ton of time into it. More importantly, and hate to see it go to waste. So there's that. Check those two things out, and we've got tons of good written product coming out every week now, way more than we did in the beginning. So if you like us, please leave a like or whatever you're supposed to do on this social media stuff to whatever it is.
Click a button.
Yeah, please. Click a button. I don't really know what they do, but I'm told it helps us.
So I'll give the listeners here a peek behind the curtain. With my intro, I enjoy tweaking my fellow hosts every episode with some introduction that's going to immediately get them hot and bothered so that they're properly lathered for the show.
I feel effectively lathered. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, the idea
lathering.
of Chris lathering me up doesn't really turn me on. I got to be honest with you.
Wash, rinse, repeat, fellas.
I think I need to go watch now.
All right. With that, we're going to jump into the show, if that's possible.
What the hell happened?
We're going
to the show?
from Chris bathing John to
Me.
jumping into the show.
to that hot excitement to what apparently is a pretty tepid excitement of this year's NBA playoffs, which are the ratings, the buzz, the energy seems significantly down. And this is something in our show prep that we talked about, from a very kind of me-search perspective. Hey, doesn't the NBA playoffs seem to not have a lot of juice, which could have been totally wrong. But as we dug around a little bit, it does look like the ratings are down anywhere from 9 to 12 points from the previous 2 years kind of rating average. So it appears that this seems to be data backed, that there just isn't a lot of excitement. And, the obvious reason is probably no LeBron, right?
Yeah, I think it's that. And this is the NBA has suffered through this all season, and part of the reason is that now that LeBron is in LA, you'd think LA great market, which it is obviously. But part of the problem is that all those games are on late because the Lakers games start at 7 LA time, and they end up being the second game of the doubleheader, whereas like the TNT regular doubleheaders that they do. Whereas in years past with LeBron in Cleveland in the eastern part of the country, you could put him on first, and then that brings in big ratings, for the second game. So it seems like, and then the Lakers stunk this year too, and he was, LeBron was out for 20 something games. So it was sort of a confluence of circumstances, I think. But in terms of the playoffs, I guess LeBron James has a much bigger effect than you really thought. I didn't really expect this much of a drop, but I'll also say I think another factor in this is that people are sick and tired of the Golden State Warriors. It's not really nearly as much fun to watch them again, and I think
they become the Patriots of the NBA.
Kind of, yeah. Except they built this super team, and nobody really liked, and people still kind of resent Kevin Durant for creating this like all-time great level, free agent, super team, and I think people are kind of turned off by that too. So it's a confluence of bad. I think those two things combine to make it awful.
So I agree with you, Steve, but I also feel like this is a situation that the NBA allowed themselves to get into. There hasn't been any emphasis on parity inside the league. It doesn't feel like they've given the owners any control over their teams recently. We've seen this before, right? We had everybody go to Miami. Kevin Durant's gonna pick and choose where he's gonna play. LeBron's gonna pick and choose, and I think that the NBA has also, for some time now. I mean, this goes back to Larry Bird and Dr. J and Magic and these guys. The NBA has really pushed a narrative of personal rivalry and individual contribution, and they've made the sport more about that than they have about team play. So when those individuals aren't available to continue that narrative, there's not as much interest in the team. Nobody cares about the team anymore. They want to watch LeBron. They want to watch the Harden. They want to watch Steph Curry and Kevin. And so I think that back when we were kids, it was the Lakers and Celtics, and that meant something. Even when the players ended up changing out. But then it all became about the individual, and so you set yourself up to failure if the individuals aren't there.
I truly don't mean this as a get off my lawn type of comment, but I think that's kind of a function of today's society, and I think it's a function of the generation of kids today. And when I say kids, I mean like the millennial 20-somethings and down. There's so much media. I'm not even really faulting them for it. I think it just kind of is. There's so much media inputs, entertainment options. There's so much direct interaction with celebrities now through social media and whatnot, that what I have noticed is that the young people of today are much more hooked on individuals, than we were, or than old, even, a generation older than us. And so I think part of what we're seeing here is just a much, much greater function on individuality, generally speaking, not just in basketball, but throughout society because of social media in large part.
Yeah, I can't deny any of those. I think those are all, sort of diagnosing the problems correctly. I think, the NBA has sort of made a choice. They've kind of gotten drunk a little bit on how much excitement their off season brings, because we've talked about this before in a number of contexts. Their off season is like, maybe one of the greatest soap operas in sports right now, and player movements. And it just is really striking to me how much of a buzz and excitement you get around, kind of middling random players changing uniforms. And then when we're sitting in the middle of what should be, the prime of their season, there isn't the same kind of energy and juice. And so I look at the sort of their off-season and on-season buzz, and it's striking. And then I think, the lack of and I'm a New York guy, so you can pshaw me all you want out there,
and we will.
But
you mean them, not us? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, but I'll take all comers. But no, a just historically unsuccessful franchise in New York, and now two basically very unsuccessful franchises in New York City does not help. I mean, you can put the Dolans on any short list of horrendous, no good, franchise destroying owner lists.
Worse than Dan Snyder.
Yeah, I think at least a debate, and probably true. So to not have going on 25 years of futility in the New York City market, that's the kind of slow burn that does have an effect.
Yeah, well, and I'll also say this about the NBA playoffs. If you look at the teams that are participating, okay, um, like you just said, the Knicks, no New York team is involved. The Lakers are not involved. The Clippers went out early in LA. They're not a thing anyway. So who do you have left? We've got the Celtics left, big market. The NBA's ecstatic about that, no doubt. Who's the best player outside of Kevin Durant in the playoffs? It's Giannis. It's the Greek freak. Giannis Antetokounmpo. However you pronounce that dude's name. He plays in
That
Milwaukee.
was beautiful, Steve.
It wasn't it? He plays in Milwaukee.
To take a poo-poo.
Stick with the Greek freak.
Yeah, the Greek freak. We'll say the Greek freak. He's in Milwaukee, okay? He is in the Saudi Arabia of the NBA, okay? Nobody cares, but the NBA desperately he's a MVP level star, and if you put him on the Knicks or, in a major market, he'd be a huge star. So then the other series, you've got the Denver Nuggets, which have a very limited following, the Portland Trailblazers, which are another wasteland, and so the major series here is Rockets Warriors, and that's about to be over, before they even get to the conference finals, and so I think it's also the third factor here is that just the nature of the teams involved and the structure of the playoffs has also contributed to down. And God help us if the finals ends up like Portland, Milwaukee, or something like that, it'll be all-time lows. So that I think. So my point is here. Number one, ratings are down because number one, LeBron James is out, and yes, it is true as we've proven that he has a huge effect because he's still the biggest star by far. Love him or like him, love him, hate him, and I'm not sure where I fall. Number two, it's just a star-driven league like we talked about. Number three, the teams involved. It's just not a good setup this year. I don't think.
I almost feel if I'm David Stern Jr. that I understand Milwaukee market is suboptimal. But at least you would get to have the crowning of the new, of a potential new king in the Greek freak.
Right.
Considering the current circumstances right here in the 2019 playoffs, if I'm a league, I might be like, well, heck, let's see Milwaukee go as far as they can, and we can just push the freak.
Of course, that's implying to the team that the front office has something to say about it, which hopefully they don't.
Well, the rumors in NBA.
Yeah, we've had those rumors before. You're going to find David Stern paying off some refs in the back alley behind a Florida massage parlor, I think, maybe, to fix these playoffs.
I want to see the video.
Please don't.
No, you really don't.
I actually really do.
Oh, dear.
All right, so let's go from a league struggling a little bit in their, what should be their golden hour of their year, to a league that, cannot seem to get itself in trouble no matter how hard it tries. And that is, of course, the National Football League, where they just threw a draft party in Nashville, Tennessee, that the numbers, the energy, the buzz, the media, it was incredible. It may have rivaled this year's Super Bowl week, for heaven's sake. Steve, give us a rundown on what happened.
Because I've worked Super Bowls, and I know what goes on and how the energy is, downtown for Super Bowls and the weeks leading up and whatnot. So historically, the NBA draft is the NFL's second biggest ratings grabber of the year behind the Super Bowl. If you guys didn't know that, it's the second most important thing on the NFL calendar. So
NFL draft, for clarity there. I think you said the NBA draft.
Oh, I really screwed that up. So
let's
start again. So what I'm saying here is that the NFL draft is the second biggest thing on the NFL calendar behind the Super Bowl. So this year, Nashville was just an absolute home run, in part because mostly because it's a huge party town. So a lot of people are willing to go take a trip to Nashville, go see the draft, and then go hang out in all the honky tonks and all of that. Where they held the draft was right down in the middle of everything. They basically held it on the Nashville's equivalent of New Orleans Bourbon Street. Okay, that's where, if you don't know Nashville very well, that's right where the draft was held. My mother's in Nashville. She was highly upset that the NFL was there. Didn't wanted them gone as soon as possible. Was very upset that they moved some statue, around. I said, Mom, The NFL couldn't
blamed Steve for everything.
I said, you don't understand. The NFL couldn't care less about your statue. If they spend $50,000 moving a statue, that's, somebody will skip a milkshake at McDonald's, and pay for it. But point is, they drew 600,000 people. They drew live at the draft. They drew as many people as almost the last 3 drafts combined. Okay?
Say 600,000 people at the draft?
Correct. A total. Over the course of 3 days, 600,000 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was a hell of a venue.
Yeah. And that was with the Saturday draft not even being live in Nashville. Okay, remember, because if you watch the draft, and I watch every moment of it again, every pick was made somewhere else. So literally nothing happened Saturday at the stage in Nashville, and they still drew 100,000 people there watching nothing. It was incredible what happened. And so next year's is in Vegas. Okay, every year it's going to go up and up and up. Imagine the scene. If that happened in Nashville, imagine the scene in Vegas next year. Imagine it.
That sounds crazy.
Yep.
I was never a big fan of moving it away from New York City, mostly because when I cared a little bit more, I would go down. I would never be able to get in, but it would be kind of exciting. I'd go down and whatever. But I gotta say, it's been a brilliant move taking it outside of New York City, and a brilliant move putting it in these larger markets that have the reputation that Steve is talking about, right? They're used to handling large people. There's a whole world of attractions that make it like packageable for the right fan to go. Your example, Steve, of New Orleans is a perfect one. In fact, in Nashville, they just passed an ordinance to allow open container drinking on that street, that stretch of blocks. So, like, it's got that culture that knows how to, your mama side, that knows how to handle it and knows how to deal.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And they're used to it because they've had country music festivals and stuff down there. It's a town that does this and is used to it. You're exactly right. I just think it was a confluence of circumstances. They had a bunch of good human interest stories. They made the media made a big deal about the bride, parties, going on, and they didn't know the NFL was there, and the bachelorette parties. They didn't know the NFL was going on there, and so they're all upset. All of that was great. The NFL, I think, has hit a home run because people like watching on TV. People like watching the big parties on TV, for some reason. I didn't ever mind it in New York either. I've
got two minds about this. I love tradition, and I often, as Steve, I often sort of lament the fact that things, the traditions that I enjoyed in days past are no longer as important to these organizations as trying to get higher ratings or a larger share or whatever it might be, and so. So I do like the idea of it being, if they move the Macy's Day Parade around, from year to year, that would probably upset me. But I also have to agree. I think they did a really good job. I think it's a good thing for them to do, and their job is to make sure that this continues to be an interesting thing. If it gets stale and gets static, then then they're out. So I think that they've done a really good job. Keeping it interesting. I think that the draft was good this year. Also, as a Redskins fan, I'm happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously, like that. I wasn't as hung up on the New York City venue as maybe you were, John. I mean, to me, it wasn't. The tradition was just watching the draft for me, not so much getting to see Radio City Music Hall on TV. I do think they've actually made it more interesting by making it localized. Now, I hated the past two places. It was in Dallas and Philadelphia. Philadelphia's just a god awful place. That
Steve hates the hell out of Philly.
I think you're on record.
Hasn't been listening to anything that Steve has ever said.
Well, look, I mean, it's the town is dirty. The people are just horrible human beings. There's no redeeming quality for Philadelphia outside of the Ben Franklin Museum and the Liberty Bell. So why does the NFL want to move in there? But then we had to suffer through Jerry Jones. So I was glad to see it was moving somewhere else. Contrast that though with Major League Baseball. We saw the story with Major League Baseball, how the ratings are down this year. Not ratings, how the attendance is down. I think it's funny that the NFL can draw 600,000 people into Nashville, Tennessee, when technically speaking, not much even went on in Nashville beyond Thursday night. Nothing really happened. Newsflash: Friday and Saturday on stage in Nashville, not much, and they drew 600,000 people. And in the meantime, some of these small market Major League Baseball teams can't even draw 10,000 people in the first 6 weeks of the season.
I think that baseball is the opposite. We were talking about the individuality and the of basketball, and even with hockey, come see Ovechkin in the Caps, and it's always about the players. Baseball just isn't a sport that really allows for that at that kind of level. You can only have so much impact as an individual athlete. The draft, nobody even knows when the baseball draft is, because nobody knows any of the players, because they're all 14 or whatever, and so it's a very different. It's a very different experience in baseball. It's a different sport with a different mentality. And the funny thing is, I'm a football fan. That's my primary sport that I follow. I cannot stand going to football games. It's a terrible experience for me. I don't care
wait a minute. So you're a football fan, yet you don't like watching football.
Oh, no, that's not what I said at all.
I'm trying to subvert your words.
I don't like going to the football game. I love watching football on television. I go to the football game, and I'm missing out on everything that, as a television watcher, I've been conditioned to expect. In terms of being, explanation. I went to the Cowboys-Redskins game Thanksgiving Day. Must have been 2002, I think. It was in Texas. I was living in Austin at the time. Went up there with my pregnant wife, my father, and a friend of mine. And at some point, I noticed that our field goal kicker was punting the ball. And I had, why in the hell is the field goal kicker out? So went home, watched the game later on, and it turns out that our punter had got his nose broke, and it was really an exciting play. At the stadium, I had no idea that any of this transpired. I just saw that we had a different person punting. Now, contrast that. I love following football, can't stand going to the stadium. I don't follow baseball at all. Love going to baseball games. Absolutely love the idea. But for me, I have a better experience going to a small market, a AA or a AAA game, than I do going to a larger MLB stadium where I'm further away from the players and it doesn't feel as intimate and personal. Going to a minor league ball game, one of the best sports experiences anybody can ever do. Family friendly, great time. I highly encourage it. But it's that for me, I don't think that the sport appeals to today's audience, but the experience, I think if more people had the experience, they'd enjoy it.
Yeah, what you said a mouthful. But the interesting part here is, we've talked about, first of all, we're just talked about two major sports off seasons. We've also talked over the last 2 years in the show, we've dubbed the Cold Stove League about baseball's off season. So there's, so there's that. But actually, baseball's gate receipts over the last few years have actually been pretty strong. And so if on Major League Baseball, this is deeply worrying. We already know that baseball is not nearly the part of the American fabric that it historically has been. We already know that because of their fractured TV rights and hyper-regionalism, that, the kind of revenue from TV is not necessarily like football or basketball. But they have drawn well, and it's actually been one of their big, fiscal successes. So if I'm Major League Baseball and I'm starting to see that trend start to go in the wrong direction, that would make me super, super nervous.
Yeah, but let's be clear also. The teams that aren't drawing well are the small market, less successful teams, and they're really drawing badly. I don't think the major market teams, the Dodgers and the Cubs and the Yankees and the Red Sox, are not having problems drawing people. The story we saw were, lower end teams. The Tampa Bay Rays were the highlight of the story. I think I sent you, Chris, for example. And the game they highlighted was like the Rays and the Orioles. Two teams that nobody cares about, and so it's not so much that and it just so happens also now that all the big market teams are all good all at one time. The Dodgers, the Cubs, the Yankees, the Red Sox, The Red Sox won a World Series. The Dodgers have been in the last 2 World Series. The Cubs finally won one a few years ago. I mean, the Yankees have finally turned the corner, it looks like, and are a good team again. And so all that's great for baseball. But yeah, I think they're having a serious problem in these small markets because you combine small market with teams that aren't good. You have the Tampa Bay Rays in what's already a small market. They haven't put a good product out forever. The Orioles, we've talked about the Orioles, and we're going to get to, the Orioles have been in a dispute with the Nationals over rights and stuff for years. But they've never historically drawn well, basically since Peter Angelos has been there and Cal Ripken retired. So I'm still not convinced that this is a death of baseball. I think it's another thing that's kind of like the NBA playoffs. There's just sort of a confluence of circumstances that are driving this more than anything.
Well, it's also, and this I would say about all three of the 4 major leagues. The NFL is far and way ahead and doesn't necessarily have this problem yet, but there was just greed about expansion in NHL, Major League Baseball, and the NBA, where they expanded too much and into the wrong markets. All 3 of those leagues are suffering from that. You can't, too many teams in general from expansion. You didn't necessarily need that many teams, and then you put them in markets that they can't sustain, and then it's starting to drag. It not only it drags the whole league back, not just those markets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like Tampa Bay, it's a small market. It's in Florida. There's tons to do already in Florida. Unless you have a team that's consistently good, I just don't think you're ever going to have high attendance at Tampa Bay Rays games. Absent
aren't there also like 4 teams in Florida? How many Florida teams are there?
Florida Marlins, Tampa Bay Rays, and that's it. Orlando doesn't have a major league team. There's not a major league team in the Panhandle. So no, I mean there's 2 teams in major league teams in Florida, but at Tampa Bay's, they probably would have done better than putting it in Orlando, quite honestly, than Tampa. I think so. But yeah, I mean, Chris, your point about expansion, I think, is dead on. Dead on. These leagues are so hot about expanding because they see the money. More franchises equals, more income. Well, the problem is when you put teams in places like Tampa, and you spread the talent out, there's a negative to it. So I think you're exactly right. And now the NFL wants to go to London. Wait till that happens. I just think it's a huge mistake.
I'm looking forward to doing that show. I found out where I got confused because the Marlins became the Miami Marlins. Yeah. And as a result, I thought there were more teams than there were.
Well, that's a whole
I apologize to anyone who actually follows baseball.
Which is definitely not you.
No.
Well, that's the Miami market's another one. They've had historically horrible ownership. If there's an owner that rivals Dolan and Dan Snyder, it was the former owner of the Miami Marlins. Okay, he just devastated the team. Abused the fan base, conned the city into a stadium, and then spent no money on the team, and then sold it to who? The hero of baseball, Derek Jeter, who promptly has done the same thing. Devastated the team, promised a lot of things, hasn't delivered on any of it, has ruined his reputation to a certain, maybe not to the Yankee faithful, but I think around baseball, generally, he's probably ruined his reputation. And so, again, you have a market with a lot to do. It's not Pittsburgh, folks, so there's nothing to do but watch sports. It's Miami, South Beach, great weather, sailing, fishing, whatever, clubbing, whatever else you want to do. Combine that with a bad owner and a bad team, that's just a sign of ratings in the tank. So I think it's not so much the game. Here's my point. I don't think it's the game of baseball. I think it's just poor planning and poor marketing more than anything else. And poor ownership.
I've got a fun exercise for our listening audience. So, what do we have the IJB Twitter now? Is that right?
That's right. Just Business Pod.
Yeah. So send us a tweet. Let us know when is the last time that a professional athlete managed to parlay themselves into a successful franchise owner. It's been attempted a number of times. But I want to hear from you guys. When's the last time that somebody did it well?
Ooh, see, that's a good one.
See, but you're not the listening audience, Steve. You're the
You
talking
don't
mouth.
want me to answer that. Sorry.
No. This is for the listeners.
Okay. All right. We'll do that.
But we'll talk about it next time. We'll talk about what you come up with.
Yeah,
Okay.
I hear your point, Steve, and I probably agree, with your take, sort of 70-30 on some of those issues. I do think there's an interest, there is an interest issue with baseball overall that I'm not sure they're going to actually be able to contend with, I think they're kind of finding their new normal in terms of American sports fans' interest in the sport.
Well, I think if you really wanted to get kind of big picture esoteric about it, I think what you would say is baseball is kind of a slow game, right? There's not hitting, like people hitting each other. There's not, the immediacy of the plays happens in, spaced out, 30-second increments, 1 minute increments, and so maybe I think if you take today's culture and today's young people who it's all about immediacy, right? You have everything on your phones, you're constantly bombarded with stuff. I guess the question needs to be raised whether baseball is too slow a game for today's modern young audience.
Today's modern audience wants more people hitting each other. That's what I got from this. If we could just incorporate more violence, and yeah, that's right. Just he pummeled that guy on his way to third.
I didn't quite mean it like that, perhaps.
This could, if Bo Jackson was playing under these rules.
Yeah, what baseball needs is a concussion problem.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, you guys are subverting what I said, of course, because that's your job.
Never happened.
My point here. Well, notice that Major League Baseball has tried to speed up the game, which I hate. Like I hate the pitch clock with a passion. Don't like it at all. To me that kind of messes up the game. But what they're trying to do is have more action happen faster, because I think today's audience, and I'm talking about, the people are going to watch baseball for the next 50 years, which are like the 20-year-olds and the 15-year-olds. I don't think that generation has been conditioned to wait, to wait for action.
I think that baseball's making a big mistake. I don't think that I think that baseball needs to own being baseball. So it's not for everybody. Golf is not for everybody. Sailing is not for. There's various sports that are just not specifically geared toward what today's audiences, are supposed to want, or
Except
or
golf.
indicated that they want.
The Masters was one of the most highest rated Masters in years.
But it's not for everybody, right? So, there's a lot of people. I'm not going to sit here and watch golf on television. It's a beautiful day. I'm going to go do something with my. This is I'd rather go play golf than sit there and watch golf. I think that baseball it's older than any of the other major sports. It's been around a long time. It has a history. It has a legacy. I think that it is well positioned to be an alternative to what everybody else is trying to become. And I think that it would do well to accept that it's got a smaller audience, but you could probably, if you catered to that smaller audience, you could probably monetize that audience pretty well, and capture a market that really isn't interested in hearing about where LeBron James wants to go next. I think it's a different sport, and it needs to own what it is.
And go ahead, Steve.
No. My question back to that would be how does ownership do that? How do you? I mean, it's fine to say, and that sounds great. But that's a question without an answer, though. It really is.
Sure.
Well, I'll defend baseball here for a little bit, and say that where they have actually done, John, what you're talking about pretty well, and that's in their online properties are excellent and really generate a great fan experience. MLB.com, etc., does a really good job. I think it's the best kind of league web hub of all the leagues. And then two, they've been real innovators in this sort of online streaming packages to fans. So like just what you're talking about, like how do you serve baseball fans? How do you know what and who likes the sport, and start to tailor some pretty, forward-looking packaging towards them, they've actually done a really good job on those two fronts. So that's an example of that happening.
I want to share a quick anecdote that you remind me of. A million years ago, so in the mid 90s, I worked at America Online, and I ran fantasy sports, Grandstand Fantasy Football, Grandstand Fantasy Baseball, which were started up by a fellow named Scott Axelrod. Shout out to Scott. He's a terrific guy. And we had a very good, I think, fantasy baseball system that we had put together. I'm really proud of it. Love to talk about it someday. The thing that was hilarious was all of these leagues were just starting to get their websites up and running, NFL.com, NHL.com. If you went to MLB.com, it was owned by some legal group. It wasn't. MLB was something like the Milton Law Brothers, some nonsense like that. It took some time for the Major League Baseball to get hold of MLB.com. And that was a long time ago. But I agree with you. I think that, since they've acquired that domain from the legal firm, they've done very well with their online space.
Yeah. As to their streaming packages, I think you're right, Chris, in that it's really easy to find games online if you buy the right package, okay? Because they've got a couple different packages, and I subscribe this year because I've got a house full of baseball fans, including me, so we watch a lot of out of market games, and so I subscribe to this MLB Extra Innings, which is $40 a month during the baseball season, and you can log into that and get online games, through that. But there's a whole nother system, a whole nother package that they also offer too, called something else. I wasn't prepared today didn't think about this, but there's a whole nother package system you can buy, that you can also get online games and whatnot. And so it's really easy to do that. Whereas football definitely isn't the case, because they've been fighting with / married to DirecTV forever, so you just can't, it's not easy to find football games online. And basketball, you can, basketball has a similar package, but basketball just doesn't seem to have the same forward-looking buzz to it that baseball does in terms of, their online presence. I agree.
Yeah, the NHL and NBA basically just sort of, took the MLB's model on that, took their lead on that to roll out their stuff. And I just think that's how people watch baseball, right? The people, let baseball be baseball. I love that slogan, John, because that's what it does. Baseball fans, they would find out what high wattage station on the radio would carry their teams, and they would know how to tune it in, right? It's the middle of summer, it's slow, you want it on in the background. I think those kind of offerings in the digital age understand how baseball fans consume baseball.
Well, what's great about the package I subscribe to, and it's through Xfinity, it's we're baseball fans. And so if it's a slow Saturday afternoon, you just flip to the MLB Extra Innings thing and see what interesting game's on. I can get all of them at all times.
See, that's nice. And I think that baseball also does particularly well as a radio program in a way that it's harder for and that's part of that's because it's slower and it takes a little time. Another thing I think that is interesting and sort of unique to baseball is that it has always, before the digital age came around, baseball was already heavy into data and statistics in a way, that football wasn't, batting averages and on base percentages and stuff. That stuff's been tracked for a very, very long time, and it was always a part of the conversation about baseball and about baseball players, that they use data in a way that the other sports haven't really been able to, because the game's different and it's played differently.
Well, and as to data, what I've noticed is that the younger generation is really into the SABR stats. And some of the SABR stats are totally bogus, okay? Some of them, the predictive stats, because I've looked at them, the predictive stats aren't that accurate. Really and truly, they're not. If you get to things like WAR, FWAR, and the predictive stats that also adjust for stadium and whatnot, it sounds great. It's basically a dizzying amount of mathematics that makes people believe it just because they don't understand it. And the truth of the matter is, some of that's way too much. Some of that just isn't that useful. But that attracts, in addition to just being, the front offices use these stats. But I think that is in and of itself a way to attract kind of a younger generation who's maybe more into that than like the Clint Eastwood types from that baseball movie, a few years ago where he was the scout who was blind and all that. That generation isn't going to get into F-WAR and FIP and all of that, right? But
Right.
a 20-year-old is going to they are way into that, even though I could argue that those predictive stats really aren't that useful.
Some are better than others.
Right. Yeah, but they're going to buy into all of it, no matter what. And if you try to argue that with them, they just shut you down.
I quit a fantasy baseball league, and my exit line was, until you return to batting average and wins for pitchers and put some real hair on your various places, I'm out.
I don't blame you. Is there a dumber stat than WAR, for example?
Yeah.
Wins over
Tell me
replacement.
what is WAR?
Wins over replacement. The idea here is there's a mean average across the league, which is 0, right? And so then if you're by the WAR calculation, if your player is a +2 WAR, the presence of that player on your team adds 2 more wins than over the average. That's the general idea.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's dumb, right? It's just dumb. But the young baseball fans really subscribe to that. And then you have like F-WAR, which is an adjusted stat, so it's even more ridiculous. Then you're adjusting the park, to the field with F-WAR. So,
all right. Well, with F-WAR, we should transition.
Yeah, time to move on.
All right, so we're going to stay in the realm of Major League Baseball to, back to the business side a little bit, and that is we've come to kind of, it looks like it's some closed records, but it looks like some kind of resolution on what has been a battle between the, Washington and Baltimore in terms of the baseball franchises since before the Nationals even existed, really. This was all part of the negotiations that got the Nationals from Montreal to D.C., but we've got some new legal and financial information on that. Steve, just give us what the arbitration found.
Okay, given what they found? Okay, well, the general background here is that for the longest time, the Baltimore Orioles owned the city of Washington, D.C. and the greater D.C. area as their home market, okay? And Major League Baseball grants every team a home market. And they'll they grant exceptions. Like there's 2 teams in Chicago, there's 2 teams in New York, and there's 2 teams in the Los Angeles area now. But generally speaking, there's home territories. And so in order to allow the Montreal Expos to move into the Washington, D.C. area, they had to crash the Baltimore Orioles home market. So to make Peter Angelos happy, what they did is they basically forced the Washington Nationals onto the local Baltimore network that was owned in large part by the Orioles, okay? And so the Nationals games are still broadcast on that network, and the revenue split was historically 79-21 in favor of the Orioles. So this arbitration, what that's all about is the Nationals said, hey, Orioles, you guys aren't paying us what we're owed, even under this convoluted, awful system that baseball agreed to. And so the arbitration was trying to figure out what, if anything, the Nationals were owed. And the arbitrator said, yeah, you're right, Nationals. The Baltimore Orioles owe you $100 million. Okay, or the network owned by the Orioles owes you $100 million. And
nice.
That's based on the beautiful part of it is that's based on net profits. And so because this arbitration judgment is now out there, the net profits have shrunk. And so the judgment itself has shrunk down to 70 or 80 million because the judgment was 100 million, And so it's not so much going to change and allow the Nationals to go out and form a new network and, all of that. It's going to be the same, but the Nationals, are basically going to get paid some money. So it's not so much. I
just love the idea that the settlement was big enough to affect the settlement.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like a nuclear chain reaction, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, eventually this gets down to, a penny somehow.
Yeah, kind of. So it's not going to affect the public product at all, but it's a continuing war of baseball territories is what sort of the nutshell of it is.
And, that's still a lot of money for these, 70 or 100 million. Yeah. So, yeah. But, this really is, this has been a long war between these two markets, and it really is a pretty big victory for the Nationals in the D.C. market over Baltimore. And to me, it really signals, we really have to highlight how much Peter Angelos is just one of your Hall of Fame, Mount Rushmore, Mount Olympus, whatever you want to call it, bad owners in professional sports. I'd say in the globe. You can include all the weird soccer leagues you want and cricket leagues. Any way you slice and dice it, this guy has just is a horrible owner. He has destroyed a franchise. He's destroyed a fan base. He's just destroyed a good market for baseball. They had the preeminent new era baseball stadium that even let Peter Angelos exist for probably a decade longer than he deserved, and he even eventually destroyed that. I mean, this is just, and then he made every wrong decision on how to welcome the Nationals into that market, and with the DMV's growth and Baltimore, you could have easily figured out a way to make that work that wasn't so conflict based.
I would have, if I was Angelos, I would have welcomed the I would have embraced it.
Exactly.
Especially since it's an American League, National League, there was no need for any of this nonsense. And it's funny, we've talked about all the horrible owners today, because I agree, Peter Angelos is up there, man. He's, I don't think you can put him past the owner of the Marlins. The guy's name is escaping right now. That's why I didn't say it earlier. The former owner of the Marlins. Somebody help me out. John, do something useful. Look him up for me.
I'll go find that out for you. But yeah, we've been on a tirade against owners today. What the hell got in our Wheaties?
We did a story a couple shows ago about how it's almost, we did the Ricketts story. We did the story about the Cubs 2 shows ago. And, the takeaway from that is that even a horrible owner, it's almost impossible to lose money. If you have a baseball, basketball, or football teams, even a terrible owner is going to do well. And so,
Steve, are you talking about Wayne Huizenga?
No.
No, that was the Dolphins.
Yeah, no. Florida Marlins. Look up Florida Marlins sale to Derek Jeter. The guy who sold it to Derek Jeter.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, but point is, I think Angelos completely screwed it up. He's made every wrong decision for decades now. Decades. About the team, about the personnel, about how he's marketed it. You're right about. I've been in that stadium. Was a beautiful stadium. Somehow they've totally ruined it. He's another owner that needs to go that will never go because the valuation. Even if you sell a bad team, he's gonna make 1,000% on his original investment.
Jeffrey Loria.
Yeah, him. Jeffrey Loria is the king. Is probably behind only Donald Sterling as the worst owner in American sports.
Did win a championship.
He has. We'll save the Marlins. Just suffice to say, he's another awful. I don't want to get off on a.
And Wayne Huizenga, for the record, was the owner of the. He was the first owner of the Marlins for 5 years.
But that's not who I was talking about, though.
I know, but I was informed that that's the Dolphins. But I have the internet on my side on this one.
You were right. Yes, John, you were right enough.
Oh my goodness. Sometimes I just barely squeak by in these things, but I always come out somehow on top because I keep talking until I do.
Here's how I would compare Loria and Angelos. Loria did a ton of damage in a short amount of time, and maybe has got that championship belt. And Angelos has his championship belt is sustained damage over a long period of time.
Yeah, it's sort of a slow burn. Yeah.
King of the slow bleed.
Loria was kind of launched the nuke on the city. And Angelos was kind of picking off people one by one for, decades. Yeah, that's true.
We should do.
So you guys get the point.
We should do a top 10 worst owners of all. That would be a fun.
Oh, we got to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. So we move on.
How many times can we get Snyder in that list?
He's not going to be at the top of it, though, if you're being fair about it.
No, but he'll get 3, 6, and 8.
For our show, he's going to be the number one. If we ask people to vote, he'd get number one just because we're DC based.
Absolutely. Sure. Put it on the hog style.
Well, we don't want to irritate Dan Snyder too much.
Right, got to get the access journalism for the hog style.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right.
Careful.
So we're going to go to our final story of the show. Story we've tracked on and off. So got not a minor update, a pretty major update. As everyone knows, Jason Witten was just a horrendous in the booth. Nowhere near the rising star as his old buddy Tony Romo. They're kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. Instead of just slinking off into a better version of retirement, he decided the smart thing was for his 38-year-old body or whatever was to re-enter the NFL. So, good luck, Witten, with that. We'll be tracking that slow motion car wreck. But so Monday Night Football, which had come off, historic broadcast, has been on ESPN now probably like 20, 15 years, and lost its quality there. You could make an argument. But this past year was really the lowest of the low. And when Witten left, everyone assumed you'd get an opportunity to remake the booth. Now, Booger McFarland's actually pretty good at a color commentator. Like, if he was your B or C team on CBS or Fox Sunday afternoons, you'd be like, I like Booger. And I wouldn't have necessarily fired him. I would have just gone to a three-man booth and brought in, a little star power. I maybe would have replaced the play-by-play guy, whatever. The bottom line is, they did nothing. They moved Booger from the mobile to the booth, kept the whatever that guy, the play-by-play.
Joe Tessitore.
Yeah, who I think is boring. He does not help. And so you could make an argument that in some ways, the lack of a move is almost doubling down on the bad of last year.
Yeah. I guess since the beginning, since the inception of Monday Night Football, it was very star-driven. You go all the way back to the beginning with Howard Cosell,
Don
Meredith, Al Michaels, all these guys. They've had a string of high-profile people. John Gruden was in the booth for a long time. Dennis Miller was there for a brief, and he wasn't really good at sports, but he was there solely, for his star power, basically.
Tony Kornheiser, too.
Yeah. So they've really gone downhill in that regard. There's no zero Q rating, in the booth now. I don't know who, honestly, I couldn't tell you a thing about Joe Tessitore's professional past, really at all. And Booger's pretty good at it, but he was a minor guy in terms of the ESPN list of stars. He's no Stephen A. Smith. Truly, if Stephen A. Smith knew anything about football, which he doesn't, they ought to throw him in the booth. Nothing else they would have people watching just because he'd say controversial things.
ESPN has, it's kind of sad to watch. When they came onto the scene, they really lit things up. You had Boomer out there. You had Stuart Scott was amazing. Rich Eisen was in his prime.
Stuart Scott.
I met him. He was a phenomenal man. Really interesting guy. Olbermann when he was doing sports.
He was the spawn of Satan. But go ahead.
I knew that was going to not go uncommented on.
I thought I'd have to bring him up, but at any rate, I mean, when he was doing sports, he was very good at it, and I think that crew was amazing. They were what is the word I'm looking for? They kind of turned things upside down. They weren't boring. They weren't the same old. They really rocked the boat, and somehow when ESPN got into doing football broadcasting, they were never as good at it as the ABC guys were at the Monday Night Football. Monday Night Football was a real event, and it was enjoyable every single week. And the ESPN guys never found that magic.
Well,
that's true.
But
I think he is.
Let me real quick. So I agree with everything you said, but let's remember.
Good man.
That's not necessarily ESPN's history. They innovated, they created, and they made successful Sunday Night Football as a thing. That was ESPN. ESPN born property, their idea, they paid for it. I personally, I know I'm probably the minority. I loved Joe Theismann in the booth in those days. Sunday Night Football as a cable property, which I think is a big distinction. Now that's totally flipped. But, so their long tail history on football is actually pretty good. They innovated the next primetime slot. I agree. Once they switched that over Sunday to Monday in terms of the broadcast versus cable, and they took over the Monday Night Football property, even with John Gruden being pretty good, right? And I think he was he kind of made you forget that they were destroying the brand for a long time, but they have destroyed the brand.
Yeah. Look, ESPN, the degradation of the ESPN brand in general is brought on by ESPN. Okay, they have alienated a huge part of the sports consuming audience. People like me who are on, politically conservative got really, really tired of hearing all, the buzzword now is woke. Woke politics and woke sports, turning ESPN to a network that's going to go over the top about politics and whatnot, really turned a bunch of people off.
Didn't they bring on Rush Limbaugh for you, though? Wasn't that enough for you?
Rush Limbaugh was, 15 years ago, and he's on for about 5 minutes, and they should never they should never brought him on, because newsflash to ESPN, because if you're listening, people don't want to hear about politics with their sports.
Yeah,
sports is an escape from
guy.
it. Rush Limbaugh's not a sports guy. They don't want to hear, similarly, I don't really want to hear Jamel Hill rail on my sports talk show listening time about politics.
Well, and Bob Costas, as good as he was, this idea that every time Bob Costas is on, he gets 20 minutes to talk about an issue. I agree with a lot of what he says.
I don't want to
listen to it. I'm watching a sports game.
Yeah, and I don't agree with any of what these guys listen to, and I don't really pay attention to ESPN anymore because I'm so sick and tired of hearing it, and so I think ESPN has done that to themselves. Listen, we're running out of time with this here, so let's just mention also that ESPN, as long as we're talking about this, ESPN the magazine announced this week that they are ceasing publication. Raise your hands if you're surprised. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Raise your hand. Anyone? John's raised his hand. John's surprised.
I threw my hand. I'm not surprised, but I do have a fond memory of an early television advertisement, which I think had Randy Moss, who I believe was the first football wide receiver on the cover of ESPN the magazine. And this was in their first year, and it was just a list of him saying, Jerry Rice has never been on ESPN the magazine. Harold Carmichael's never been on the cover of ESPN the magazine. He was just listing various wide receivers who had never been on the cover of ESPN the magazine, and I enjoyed that. And I like Randy Moss.
I have been a subscriber to Sports Illustrated since I was 11 years old. Every year since I was about 11. I love magazines. I love the feel of magazines. I love getting it and sitting down and reading it. I love, getting in the mailbox every week. Love magazine. Never liked ESPN magazine. Never subscribed it. Never watched it. But, I'm probably one of the few who would say that in today's society. But, because you have to think, how many subscribers is Sports Illustrated really going to grow? How many new subscribers are they going to grow? Probably not many. Sad to say because I love it, but the death of ESPN the magazine is probably a sign of things to come.
Your grandmother had Reader's Digest, didn't she?
I was a Reader's Digest subscriber for a period of time.
I saw it. You've got Reader's Digest written all over.
Yeah, you don't have to go back generations there, John.
No,
Reader's Digest was great. Back then. It was just a different time, a different era. It
was a different world. I saw a guy. I went to the DMV the other day as we moved to Pennsylvania. I had to go to the DMV. It sucked. And there's a dude there reading the newspaper. And that just brought a feeling to me that I missed so much of waking up, getting a cup of coffee, and going and getting the newspaper, reading the damn newspaper. And that's how you found out your news. And there was something nice about that. So I'm going to get off of your lawn, Steve, because I'm going to kick people off my own.
Oh, my gosh. I would.
Well, Chris doesn't have a lawn because he lives in New York City.
That's true.
Yeah,
get off my block. Well, I don't think the death of ESPN the magazine is really a commentary on ESPN either way. I think that's a commentary on much bigger trends, and Sports Illustrated will be doing a show, RIP Sports Illustrated, eventually as well. So, and you could make a case that ESPN the magazine. And I was never a subscriber. I actually, probably in their first decade, probably did read it off and on. I think they actually innovated in the medium in some interesting ways. But I think it's neither here nor there in terms.
It was big.
Yeah, I mean, they did some stuff with design, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm gonna go back because I'm gonna throw you a weird bone, Steve, because I don't agree with you on the ESPN stuff, or maybe I just don't care, or whatever. But I know you'll never listen to it. But there was an excellent, about 90-minute interview with John Skipper and Bill Simmons on Bill Simmons' podcast.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know. You're doing yourself a disservice because it was a fascinating interview on many levels. But I'm throwing you a bone here. I'm giving you your 10 seconds of 10 seconds that you would need. He admits on there that they probably did involve themselves too much either way, and they just should have understood let sports be sports more. And he did do a bit of a, there's some equivocating I personally would believe with, but he did pretty starkly say that he realized that there was some missteps there.
And listen, I'm not saying that I want, Tucker Carlson doing sports. I'm saying that, that would turn the Chris Larrys of the world off just as much. You wouldn't want to listen to that either. I wouldn't blame you. Sports isn't people. What John Skipper fundamentally misunderstood is that sports is an escape.
No, that's what he admitted.
Yeah, he knows that now. Yeah. And of course, and he learned it the hard way. And the more ESPN sticks to sports, the better off they are. Because I want to watch SportsCenter and not get beat over the head with how I'm a bad person because I'm not a liberal. And you don't want to hear the opposite of that, particularly either when you're watching your sports. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to see Jamel Hill on ESPN, and you don't want to see Tucker Carlson on ESPN for the same reason. And the sooner ESPN learns that, the better. And it sounds like they're finally getting there a little bit, because we've talked about this before, but did you notice, and Chris and I almost killed each other one time over this topic, so we're not going to get into it, but the topic of the national anthem stuff in NFL completely, they just dropped that totally, and they don't talk about it at all, and there's a reason for that.
It was bad for the league to talk about it. Is this the time where I'm allowed to say that I'm a little bit tired of every sporting event having to feature the military because the two aren't related?
Probably not the best time.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the military puts up with it because it's a recruiting thing. It's great for the military and recruiting, and that's why
the military loves
it.
As a sports fan, I don't know why I have to have military in all of my sports.
Because let's not get into that because it's going to go badly.
Well, I'll answer it in a pretty show specific way. It's a good recruiting tool, and they pay for that ad space just like Pepsi, Coke, or Budweiser. Yes. So it's a transaction like nothing else.
That's and DoD budgets for this kind of stuff. By the way, we're not paying the troops, and we're not buying aircraft because of this. Yeah,
right. Yeah. So in that way, they're buying that access.
It's literally an advertisement.
Budweiser.
That's what it is. Yeah, that's literally true. So anyway, I think we've covered it enough. R.I.P. to ESPN the magazine. Sports Illustrated. As much as I love you, start digging your grave.
Yeah, start writing the obituary.
I'm going to be upset and sad when it goes, but it's going to happen.
And
it's not long.
And they do not have. I mean, ESPN was smart enough way back, when John was still at AOL, was smart enough to start building up its web properties. Sports Illustrated never really did that.
I mean, they have a website, but it's not it's much less evolved. Than ESPN's for sure.
Yeah, we didn't really succeed at building up our web properties at AOL in the long run either.
That's true.
All right. Well, with
long live dial-up internet.
With
absolutely,
yes, with the fail whales all around, that's probably a good time to wrap it up. So, just a reminder, we're growing slowly but steadily. The show does have a Twitter account now. It's at Just Business Pod. We're trying to kick up a little bit of dust, so if you want to, we'd be more than happy for you to pick a fight with us on something so that we can gain a little bit of traction. We had some fun tweaking some Dallas fans a couple weeks ago and some other little various.
The Dallas fans got offended. Yeah, it made me happy.
Which was so crazy because I was making I was actually making a pro Dallas point overall.
Well, that guy was
first
pretty
mistake.
Well, the guy we were talking about was pretty stupid. Let's be honest.
But then
he was a pretty dumb guy.
The Dallas fans backed him up. It was insane.
Yeah,
you gotta credit them for looking out for their own.
I guess.
I don't care how stupid this guy is. He's my stupid guy.
But I
pretty much.
I was like, why am I the guy? Why am I ride or die with Roger Staubach here? Let's just back out of this whole thing. Anyway, so go there. It's fun. And you can also find me at ChrisLarry33. How about you fellas?
John _ Worrell. Try to spell it correctly.
You got it right. Congratulations, Sean. You figured your Twitter handle
I looked it up before the show this time.
Okay. And I don't have my own Twitter handle, but you can find me most of the time at the Hogsty.
Yes, and I just want to back this up. There's a lot of great. The content game in the network has really, taken a pretty huge jump in the last 2 or 3 months. So check out all of the Hogsty properties.
And if you're still listening at this point, remember, send us a tweet. Let us know who was the best athlete that went on to become an owner of a franchise and actually had some success at it, because I'm dying to know.
All right. And so we will see you in 2 weeks' time.